I'm typically a very fast speaker. So if I'm too fast, just like start raising your hand, be like, slow it down, slow it down. Okay, it's a pretty cool slide, isn't it? I spent like 3 hours making that. So pretty proud. I'm pretty proud of that. That's custom font. I made that, you know. Anyway, yeah, my information is here. This is my Twitter handle. This is my company's handle. We're in stealth mode, but like you're so stealthy, right? But I'll tell you a little bit about Verica and what we do. But also use the tag chaos engineering if you can. So who here has heard of chaos engineering? Wow. Okay, now put the hands down. Who here has heard of chaos monkey? Usually it's more. I don't know why, it's the same thing. We're going to talk a bit about chaos engineering, resilience engineering, human factors, safety engineering. Also, how all those things are the seed for what enabled me to start applying all those concepts to cybersecurity. And I will tell you an enormous door to value opened up, and I'm going to tell you all about that, how to do it. And if we don't have time, I'm going to spend some time in the back after the talk, if anybody's interested in more information. That's me. Yeah. I'm the CTO of a company called Verica. Verica is comprised of myself. Well, the founders is Chaos. The person who founded Chaos Engineering at Netflix, his name is Casey Rosenthal. He's the CEO he's my co-founder. So I am known as sort of the pioneer of chaos engineering for cybersecurity. I'll talk a bit about the open source tool I wrote, where I did it, why I did it. But that's our company. We hope to do cool stuff. Today I'm going to talk about, that's Verica. It's a cool logo. Who here has seen Minority Report, the movie? Seen it? You know, like where the ball rolls down, right? And it says a crime is about ready to be committed. Well, I'm going to show you, and I'm going to describe how chaos engineering is one of the only proactive disciplines in the world that can proactively identify an outage or an incident before it's going to happen. And it's not an easy thing, and it's a very carefully applied methodology. We'll talk a bit about how that's done. But actually, Netflix wrote a tool, actually its primary tool for chaos engineering was called CHAP, the Chaos Automation Platform. The original name actually for that tool was Precog. So it's funny that my talk has been about security precognition, knowing before. So I'd like to start a little bit about, I like to start off by this quote from John Allspaw. If you haven't heard of John Allspaw, there's really sort of two origins of DevOps stories. There's one, Andrew, what's his name? It's either John Allspaw or it's Andrew and what's the guy's name? Andrew Clay Schaefer or John Allspaw is sort of quote, either one of them is sort of the two origin stories. Patrick Dubois came up with the name. Who's heard of DevOps before? Probably most of the room, right? Well, John Allspaw, CTO of Etsy, he originally sort of came up with the idea that when he was at Etsy, that so the idea of 10 deploys a day, and then ended up being that Patrick Dubois came up with the name DevOps. Anyway, John Allspaw is also one of the pioneers in resilience engineering to what we do. So resilience is a story of the outage never happened. This is the story I would like to tell. A little bit about me. I'm CTO of a stealthy startup. Not so stealthy if you know the name. But I'm the former chief security architect for United Health Group. My job there was the security engineering strategy for the company. If you don't know very much about United Health Group, the largest healthcare company in the world. The only entity larger is the NHS in the UK, which is a government entity. I led the DevOps transformation and the open source transformation at the company. I spent a lot of time before that at NASA, the DoD, Department of Homeland Security, United States. And I'm a frequent speaker and author on a lot of this stuff. I actually have the new O'Reilly book for chaos engineering is soon to come out. There's an original 70-pager. Now there's a full 300-page handbook coming out. I wrote the security chapter for that, as well as there might be a full book coming soon. So to be continued on that subject. I also led and wrote the Chaos Slinger tool, which is the first open source tool for chaos engineering and security. Over there you see, yeah, those are pictures that make me look cool. So, that's my beautiful wife. She actually might find her in the audience. She's gonna kill me for that. No, John Willis on the left is not sitting on my lap. He's, Jeff Williams is just really tall. Yeah, right. Okay, so in this session, I will cover a lot of information. It's gonna be like drinking from a fire hose. I encourage you to get my contact information, talk to me afterwards. I always follow up, I always set up time with people. So especially if I spoke too fast, I tend to do that because I'm very passionate about this subject. I believe there's a lot of problems I've uncovered that is going to change the way we think about building things as an industry. So let's start off here. Our systems have evolved beyond the human ability to mentally grok or mentally understand their behavior. So over here, you guys familiar with the Death Star diagrams? Anybody? So each one of these dots is a microservice. Each one of those dots. Amazon.com, Netflix. But guess what? Everyone's now doing this. This is not just the world of FAANG, Apple, Facebook, Google, Netflix. Now, even healthcare companies are designing large-scale microservice architectures that look like that. That's thousands of microservices to facilitate one app. So this is a fun little piece of software. This was written by the Netflix traffic team to help them understand behaviors with it's actually a piece of software. On the slide, it's a GIF, but it's a piece of software called Visceral. But it's very difficult at any given point within this architecture to understand what is happening. It's very difficult for a human to mentally grok, mentally churn, and understand what is happening. So that's the fundamental issue here, is that, so let's talk about complexity. So this is how we're building things today, right? Is that things like continuous delivery, behavior-driven development. You get the Dan North here, with BDD. Things like service meshes, APIs, cloud computing, continuous integration, continuous delivery, immutable construct, containers, automation, blue-greens. These concepts are directly equated with value. They may be complex, but the reason why we're using them is directly related to business value. But the problem is that they're all contributing to a sheer amount of complexity that us as humans are finding very difficult to understand our own system's behavior. It is my belief, actually, when organizations achieve building systems that are either the combination of three things. It's a theory, okay? I'm willing to prove me wrong, but when you fully achieve public cloud computing, achieve that transformation, when you achieve continuous delivery, where you can deploy many times a day, and when you've fully been able to accept and deliver domain-driven design with microservice architecture, when you've achieved those three things, you now are at a state where you're building things at such a scale, such a complexity. These are so disparate, and the pieces are changing constantly, and the team models are different. It's next to impossible to understand what is going on. But all these other methodologies are also adding to the equation. But we need to be doing these things. The reason why we're doing this is because we're delivering value to customers faster than we've ever done before. That's important. But it's also important to realize that we need to understand our own behavior, or our adverse effects will happen. So what's the modern state of security? Well, if you look back on this one, let's go back here, just a quick review. I can't go back, oh no. So anyway, I can only go forward, let's go forward. It is what it is. So security is still mostly monolithic. It still requires mostly expert knowledge. In order to be a Palo Alto Firewall admin, you got to know Panorama. You have to go to class. You have to learn a special skill. Although it's really not that complicated, but it's still expert-based. Requires domain knowledge. Security is still, I used this phrase at an RSA talk recently, and people liked it, is that security is so busy catching up, they're not keeping up with modern advances in technology. It took 5 years after Docker and containers. Well, containers have arguably been around for about 25 years, but Well, yeah, but with Docker, it took about 5 years before NIST in the United States, which is a common standards framework that a lot of other countries follow, use that as a standard to follow. It took them 5 years to develop a security standard for Docker containers. That means that most security people were not actually doing anything about it until they got the standard, and it took 3 years after they were developed before there was actually security controls. So what happens after you've been developing 3 to 5 years, and all of a sudden now there's guidance, what happens is it becomes very disruptive. Is that because now I'm going to halt what you're doing, I'm going to put security in because I think I know what I'm talking about, but actually I'm not. I have no idea what I'm talking about. I've just been. The point of it is that there's a lag in the industry from an engineering perspective, and we got to do better. We're still actually mostly still focused on the adversary as well, and I'll talk a bit about the actual research and data behind how we got to think differently. And the last bit, actually, is we still are designing stateful security in a stateless world. So what's the answer to all this complexity, right? It's simplicity, right? That's the logical, common sense response. Well, the reality of it is actually for years, for almost 15, 20 years, software has continually abstracted and simplified, abstracted and simplified, abstracted and simplified. The point of here is just to realize how many layers have we been adding, but how well do we really understand the ones and zeros at the end of the day? How well so who here has ever actually seen a line of code execute? Oh, I thought I was going to raise my hand. I never have. The point is not to test you. Well, we have one person. I never actually have. The point is not to test your technical acumen. The point is to throw the proposition out that how well do you really understand how your systems behave? Oops. So coming back to real quick before I move on is that how do you understand how your systems behave, right? Well, if you can't actually see it execute, how do you know what your system's doing? You know most likely through two things. It's usually footsteps in the sand at best. Either you have log events, which are written by software engineers, okay? And what do software engineers prioritize? Features, right? Features, right? So typically, so our ability to see and understand our own systems is limited to either sort of log events or sort of observability kinds of tools, or things like tracing as well. So I just want to point that out. So moving on to sort of software complexity, I find most of the best research in software engineering and systems engineering was written in the 1980s. There's a paper called No Silver Bullet. It was about the nature of software complexity. And so software complexity comes from two different areas, either accidental or essential complexity. This is a great point of debate afterwards because I know people want to debate this topic, whether or not you can actually make things simpler. Remember, software always only ever increases in complexity. But let's talk about where essential complexity comes from. So essential complexity comes from things like Conway's Law. So have you heard of Conway's Law, anybody? Okay, so if you haven't heard of it, Conway's Law essentially states that organizations are destined to design systems that reflect the way they communicate. Well, the way I worked at United Health Group, the way they communicated was a direct reflection of how they did business. The reason, whether you like United Health Group or not, the way they did business was also the reason why they made money. So it's hard to get rid of actually the complexity inherently in the business without changing the business to begin with. Accidental complexity are things where you, I think I got some slides for this. No, I don't actually. It does work now. Hey, we're good. It works. So accidental complexity comes to the way we do things in software, where we add additional complexity to the equation. But it's important to recognize that inherent in change is also complexity. So things that change are inherently complex. But things that change, you can't just stop changing things as a business. Businesses that can change and be resilient to change also are directly related to value. So there's a direct relation between change, complexity, and change and value, inherently complexity and value. So it's important to recognize that if you spend all your days trying to reduce complexity, you might find that you're chasing your own tail. So Dr. David Woods likes to say that as the complexity of a system increases, the accuracy of a single agent's own model, our own mental models of our systems, our knowledge of that model decreases. So how well do you really understand how your system works? The argument actually is that things like microservices, public cloud computing, continuous delivery have, it's very human to solve one problem, and then create more. But it's arguable that we really didn't understand how our systems worked when we only had 3-tier apps. So remember, it's very difficult. When we talk about chaos engineering, we're not so concerned with an event at one point anywhere in here. We're actually concerned with cascading failures throughout the system. Is that each one of these microservices depends upon each other. If you see the lines and how they interconnect here, is that it's the way they interact and react with each other through change that make them this fundamentally complex adaptive systems. And I would take one point here and actually highlight the fact that complex adaptive system doesn't mean a system that is complex or complicated and that changes. It's actually applied physics, it's science, okay? Is that it's a whole domain, so your human body is a complex adaptive system, the weather patterns, financial markets, nation-state political interactions, they're all complex adaptive systems. So the problem is now we're developing systems that reflect that behavior. And one of the primary behaviors is that the outcomes are nonlinear. I mean, it's no longer in the realm of linear physics. Okay, this is some deep stuff, right? Is that for every action, there's not always an equal or opposite reaction. Okay, is that what can happen is that the ripple throughout the system can magnify the impact. So instead of having 1 + 1 = 2, you can have 1 + 1 = -5,000, and you wonder why. And that's really the problem that we're attacking here. I'm trying to build up the problem why chaos engineering is such an important field. Oh, there we go. Too much. Okay, so what does all this have to do with security? You've heard this stuff from John Allspaw, Casey Rosenthal, Nora Jones. But what does this all have to do with security? Well, the reality of it is failure happens. So how many people heard it, remember this event? I don't know if it's as big in Europe as it was in the United States, but this ballistic missile event, how many people heard of that? Yeah, those Americans. The problem is here, so failures happen. Actually, the normal state of your system is to fail. The normal state of a human is to fail. But no system is actually safe or secure. Humans make them that way. That's important to remember, right? So this problem is not going away. Okay, but this is funny. So it's funny, but it's not really that funny, actually. We see Amazon Prime goes down for 3 hours. People couldn't make transactions for 3 hours. That was roughly $100 million Amazon lost during that period of time. You have airports. I don't know what they're going to do. We're lucky we can fly. But the ballistic missile, what's interesting here is that we equate these types of outages and incidents with, lack of continuity for business services. But what happens if this ballistic missile alert happens again? What happens if it happens again? Are the people of Hawaii going to take it seriously? Are they going to think, oh, that system just fails? Oh, that happens, right? Well, what if it's for real? So this stuff's important. So incidents and system outages are expensive. So I'm gonna get more into that. I think you guys know that already, it's kind of duh. But I wanna talk a bit about, so chaos engineering for security can be applied in many use cases. My talk predominantly today is about incident response, but there's so much value I'm learning you can get from this. Let's talk about incident response for security. So security incidents are somewhat subjective in nature. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, United Health Group, I think we spent, I'm not going to give away specifics here, but we spent, I don't know, anywhere from $500 million to $1 billion in security a year. I'd say that's quite a bit. It's probably more than most companies, right? But no matter how much we spent, there's no way we could know when it was going to happen, how it was going to happen, where it was going to happen, and why they were doing it. So no matter how much you prepare, there's no way of really knowing how effective the security you put in place really is. That's the nature of it. So let's face it. Let's talk about a little bit about, right, it's SpongeBob. Let's face it. So when outages happen, we operate at fundamentally a different pace of mind. We think differently. Most of the time, be honest, we're freaking out. In security, when we call someone and it's a response, they're even freaking out more, right? They're like, I don't know, it wasn't my app, it was his app, I don't know, it was the database, no, it was the front end. No, it was, I don't know, was that another? It's people operate mentally, cognitively different during these conditions. And the problem is that people spend so much time reacting to outages but when an incident or an outage happens, nobody's sitting there like, okay, let's really look at the value of the log data we got here, guys. Was this valuable to you? Nobody does that. Within 20 to 30 minutes, a CEO of a company is typically, why are we still down? Get that thing back up and running, we're losing millions of dollars a minute. That's and no matter if it's security or not, it becomes very much, that's the culture. So it's about changing things as fast as you can, trying to get it back up and running. At the same time, people are freaking out. This is how everybody works. So response, I argue, is actually the problem with incident response. I made the chaos too, totally made that. Anyway, so let's talk about chaos engineering. So chaos engineering is one of the only ways to be proactive. And sadly, we need more ways. Chaos engineering, the definition, is the discipline of experimentation, very important word, experimentation, on a distributed system in order to build confidence. Building confidence is our goal here, in the system's ability to withstand turbulent conditions. So, a lot of people said they heard about Chaos Monkey. So Chaos Monkey was, I think it was 2008, Netflix was actually, believe it or not, what's funny is I talked to a lot of people at Chaos Engineering and they're like, well, I don't know, my company can't do that. I mean, chaos as a normal state of day, right? I mean, everything we do is chaos. Well, and we're not in the cloud, we're doing the cloud transformation and we're the digital transformation. Well, guess what? Chaos Monkey was born out of the digital transformation for Netflix. Chaos Monkey was born out of Netflix moving from DVDs and CDs to Amazon. But what the problem is the feature at the time of Amazon is that, as they were building things, AMIs and instances would disappear. It's kind of a feature at the time. But to Amazon's credit, Netflix's architecture was so large. I mean, Netflix is now 45% of global internet. That's a lot of bits, right? But at the time, they weren't that big, but that's very heavy engineering footprint to be able to encounter. So what's happening is these instances would disappear, and Netflix bet a lot on going to the cloud and doing the streaming. And so what they said was, okay, we need to be resilient to this problem or our business will fail. So out of that was born Chaos Monkey. What was great about Chaos Monkey is that, so during business hours, when people are available to fix things if there's a real problem, during business hours, it would proactively repeat that failure. It would just bring down instances. Pseudo-randomly, it would just bring it down. Everybody knew about it. And the great part about Chaos Monkey is that it drove a behavior for developers that could be me. That could happen to me. My system must be resilient to this type of failure. And what's great about that is chaos engineering has a knack for putting more context and well-defined problems as a result of it in front of software engineers. Software engineers do great when you give them well-defined problems. So CHAP actually, this is something very few people have heard about. Anybody here heard of CHAP? We got some chaos engineering nerds here. Okay, we do. CHAP was never open sourced. It was built by Casey Rosenthal's team, Casey and Nora Jones at Netflix. It's an integration piece of software, so there's no value in any other company using it but Netflix. But it runs 10 to 20,000 experiments a day. So chaos engineering, CHAP is the most advanced version of chaos engineering on the planet until now. But this may or may not be the basis of what Verica built, but may or may not. I can't confirm or deny. Maybe I can. So essentially what CHAP does is it uses a series of heuristics to introspect a microservice architecture. And what it will do is it will make 2 copies of a node, and it will label one of control, one of experiment, and it will siphon off about 0.01 to 0.05% of traffic through a proxy. And for the control, it will just pass the traffic along to the next service. But for the experiment, it does something interesting, like flap a database connection, introduce a misconfigured port, introduce latency up to the SLO. You actually find very interesting results when you do those sorts of things. Who's doing chaos engineering? There's about a little over 1,000 companies now doing chaos engineering. I just put some logos on a piece of paper, but these are the companies at least I'm aware of, plus or minus 970. But pretty much everybody's doing it now because part of the reason is that they're realizing our systems are just too big and change too often to really fundamentally understand. You could be doing everything right from a CI and CD perspective, and still weird things happen. Because think about it, a quick example. So let's say you have a healthcare app. Let's say you have 10 microservices, okay? A payments API, you've got claims API, you've got 10 of them, okay? But the reality is you don't have 10, right? You've got at least 6 to 10 of each one of them for throughput, okay? On top of that, you may have older versions, newer versions. You may also have a different team that runs each microservice. They may or may not, usually if they're doing well, releasing at the same schedule. But if you're releasing 10 times a day and you have old versions, new versions, old versions because other microservices need those older versions for their functionality. You have new versions because you're testing new things. Remember, value to market, right? And things like blue-greens. But what happens is that everyone can do everything right, and weird things can happen as a result of that behavior outside of the technology, just the humans interacting. So yeah, companies doing chaos. This is the doctrine. So this has become, at least when I started applying chaos engineering to security, I figured that those Netflix guys have been doing it for a while. They probably know what they're talking about. So I use this as the rule book, as the doctrine by which to live by. And if anyone experimenting with it, I highly advise that you do that. So, okay, security chaos engineering, what's this all about? Okay, I'm probably not doing well on time. Let's see. Okay, I'm not doing that bad. So let's get back to how people operate differently when they expect things to fail. Remember, the normal state of a human is to fail, okay? But this is what happens, okay? This is how we operate when things happen. But what if they didn't have to be that way, okay? What if there was a way to proactively identify these failures, understand them, drive value when the world is not on fire, okay? Different, right? Different, right? Okay, so chaos engineering, we do in this state, right? The point is that, you know, I love the example, it used to happen all the time at past places I worked, is that, you know, you'd have software engineering teams or product teams trying to get a change in because they know it's either a security flaw or quality issue, they've been dealing with it, they're getting errors from it, so they're trying to push this change, they go through a CCB, the CCB asks them a bunch of questions that are unrelated, and they can't actually get the change executed but when an outage happens or an incident happens because of it, it happens immediately, the change. Right? And it's just, but what conditions are more effective for the change to occur, right? You know, hold on, repeat, right? Here, right? Here, I'll leave it at that. So, but what's great about chaos engineering is focused predominantly more on experimentation versus testing. I'm gonna break that down here in a second. So, just a reminder, the normal condition of humans and the systems we build is to fail. And we need that failure to learn and grow. It's part of who we are. If you have a system that you operate day to day, right, that does not fail, go back the next business day you're at work, check that system. It is failing somewhere in some fashion. That is the normal state. You should be worried about that system. So here's what it's all about. Let's flip the model. Why do we have to wait for the post-mortem to get the best information about a system? Why couldn't we proactively? Because now we can understand the starting point of a failure in the end of it. Versus when an incident outage happens, we assume we have the data, the tools, instrumentation to understand when it happened. Usually, and by the way, it is never root cause. Anybody here who thinks root cause is a thing, I challenge you. Think about one root cause why the company you work for is successful. Most people will say, well, it's because sales is great, we have great product, we have great engineering. I said root cause, right? The same reason why you can't do that for a successful outcome is the same reason why you cannot do that for a negative one, right? So root cause, if you come up with a root cause, especially one that ends in human error, that is the beginning of your investigation, not the end. Because that is your beginning, you're on track to get some of the best value and stop some of the repeat failures that keep happening. Because usually, if you came up with the root cause, there were probably lots of other things in humans involved in different processes, systems that led up to that one human that was on call at 3 a.m. That made the change that had to deal with that, right? It's not, we just love to, as a human, we love to simplify things. Well, and especially, so Sidney Dekker, if you're looking for more information on this, and trust me, this is a great starting place to really understand this stuff, read The Field Guide to Human Error by Sidney Dekker. Phenomenal. Changed the way I think about everything. So anyway, back to this. So let's turn the post-mortem exercise into what prepares us, into a value-generating idea. So the idea is not to cause chaos. Chaos is inherent in our systems. The idea is to drive order by using it to our advantage. So chaos engineering, actually, one of the things, I'll tell the story of Chaos Slinger here in a minute, but we used it to drive objective feedback loops that were missing in our security effectiveness. How well do I know how effective my firewall is, or my configuration management tool, or my replace the blank with your own security control set. So some of the things we use from an incident response perspective is that we're able to manage and measure. We didn't actually know how effective runbooks were because it's very difficult because security incidents are subjective. Even if they're the same nature of the failure, it seems the same. There's a lot of context around the failure that just because it happened because of firewall misconfiguration in one data center, and it looks like a misconfiguration in the other data center, doesn't mean because the teams were different, the context, the products, the apps. It's very difficult to compare how effective you were for that one class of failure. But one thing we're able to do is because we weren't guessing what actually caused the problem, we caused it. We injected the failure. When we watched it, we measured it, we managed it. We could actually see, we didn't have enough people at that point in time or that time of day. We didn't have the right skills or we didn't have the right technology. So testing versus experimentation is an important distinction to understand. This is how in chaos engineering, this is how we like to break down the understanding. So testing is more geared around a sort of a binary result, a true or false, a 1 or a 0. You know the information you're looking for before you go looking for it. Where experimentation, you seek to derive new information. Think scientific method. You're trying to derive new information that you previously did not know. And I'll talk about how experimentation led to some of the greatest value for United Health Group for Chaos Slinger. Okay, here's some difference. So I'm gonna take a pause and talk about Chaos Slinger. So one of the things, so with Chaos Slinger, essentially what it does is, it's on GitHub, it's an archive repo because I left the company. There may be a new actually open source tool that does all this stuff that I'm gonna release here probably in the fall for people who can really try to experiment with security applications. But the security chaos experiments focus mostly around accidents and mistakes that people make that lead to security problems. And in my research, I've actually found that is the most systemic problem in the industry. So Chaos Slinger, actually, I think I got a slide here in a minute. I'm gonna wait to cover that in a second. So some people ask me, what is the difference between, pen testing, red teaming, purple teaming, security crayons? Do I have any security people here? Oh, okay, all right. All right. Actually, I spent most of my career as a software engineer, actually. So security, your pen testing tools, your automated red team tools, and your purple teaming tools, the problem with them is in that system I showed you before, they're so noisy. When you try to do in Node.js, you try to do a Node.js mass assignment attack, you have to try several things to see if they exist, and then several things to try to pull off the attack, that you're making so many changes, it's very difficult to ascertain whether one thing worked or it didn't. And don't get me wrong here, the more testing and instrumentation we have, the better. But there's a difference when it comes to large-scale distributed systems, how you do those things. Most of the events are still most of the techniques are point in time. And I've actually never seen anyone do the red teaming, purple teaming, or pen testing probably more than once a week. That's the most frequent I've ever seen it. Usually what happens is it's once a year or once a month if it's like your flagship app and it's point in time. By the time you release the value, you've already delivered 10 new releases, and the value of the pen test is not as valuable anymore. But that's changing. So I wrote an article online called Red Fish, Blue Fish, Purple Fish, Chaos Fish on opensource.com. Hope so. Okay, oops. So yeah, so the goal is about experimentation more than it is about testing. And its focus is on cascading failure, not so much on initial failure, but the focus is also to drive new information that you did not know. Okay, so I've been actually, for the book, I actually went and dove into the last 10 years of data breach research, and actually found out, there's actually some interesting information here, is that I want to point out that human error is not actually a term, not actually a thing, it's just being human. Okay, but the Pwnimon report, Pwnimon is owned by IBM, and actually try to get them to change this, because I think that we should think differently about how we think about security. But most of what we do in the industry is we think about this, right? So the primary focus in the industry is on malicious and criminal attacks. We think about nation-state political interactions and APTs and rats and malware and it's honest to God, it's way more interesting to read about in Foreign Affairs magazine or in the New York Times. But actually not, in my opinion, where the problem is coming from. If you look at the majority of malware, if you download some of that code and you look at it, it is moronic, right? Like I would say not all of it, about 4 to 5% of that is actually legit, good code, to be aware of. But 95% of it's unsophisticated stuff. It requires some kind of low-hanging fruit to exist. An open port, a deprecated piece of software, somebody forgot to patch something, somebody forgot to apply a control, or they had lack of visibility. Well, the problem, in my opinion, is happening is that this actually breakdown, this distribution, has actually been occurring for the last 10 years. Is that it's roughly 25 to 28% human error and systematic glitches. What does that even mean, right? I couldn't actually get a consistent definition from Pwnimon or IBM on that. Is that essentially it means that we didn't understand why the system failed. It's a system failure, right? But how many of those malicious attacks would have actually succeeded had that not existed? Okay, so what chaos engineering for security is focused on the low-hanging fruit, mistakes we make as humans as part of building things. We make a lot of mistakes. So a point that I want to call out here is that in the report, it calls out that the definition of human error is negligent, careless humans in or part of a data breach. I was throughout my career in government and private industry, software engineering, network engineering, system engineering, security, I have never once actually run across a human that was intentionally careless. I really haven't, I'm being honest, right? I find most people are somewhat careful. Now, security people will say, well, they went around my security or my process. Well, they have a job to do too. Other people are involved in delivering things other than security. It was kind of the point. These are part of the reasons why we need to think differently in security. And this is one of the great parts about chaos engineering, is that it really pulls in software engineers, ops people, and security people to the same table. It's about the same problems. So proactively manage and measure. So it's about continuous security validation. How am I doing on time? Let's see. Okay. So what we were able to do at United Health Group is build confidence in what actually works versus what we thought. That's the major takeaway from chaos engineering. It's not only about the point is to validate how the system works versus how you thought the system works versus how it actually works in reality. So the point is to stop looking for better answers and start asking better questions. So what is the system actually doing? How has it done this before? Why is it behaving in that way? What is it supposed to do next? And how do you get into this state? So how does my security really work? What happens is that a lot of the security processes today are very subjective. Is that risk assessments? Anybody here filled out a questionnaire before? Oh, come on, everybody's got to raise their hand. Okay, so often what we do is we ask questions to humans about systems instead of asking systems questions more directly. So, okay, now I'm going to talk about Chaos Slinger. So Chaos Slinger, it's on GitHub. It's an open source. It's the first open source tool that applies these concepts, it's integrated with Slack. It's a serverless app. We actually built it based upon Chaos Monkey, and we looked at the Go code in Chaos Monkey and determined, well, most of the stuff you don't need anymore. In 2008, you probably needed a delivery pipeline, or you needed, permissions and things like that. We actually wrote it 100% as a serverless app in AWS. It's a series of Lambda functions, there's some great documentation on it in the repo. Here's the example. Essentially, we have about 30 to 40 different types of experiments you can do now with security chaos engineering. But the reason why I chose a misconfigured port is because everyone here can understand a firewall. Everyone here can understand the fact that sometimes things get misconfigured. I've actually seen data breaches to places I've worked because somebody actually allowed only one port, but denied one port and allowed everything else. And that can create bad things when it comes to people trying to get into your network. So the primary example of Chaos Slinger is the injection of a misconfigured or unauthorized port change. Now this can happen for lots of reasons. Somebody could have filled out a ticket wrong. Somebody could actually execute the change wrong. Somebody could have, if it's this code, somebody could have wrote the code wrong. Hopefully your testing is good. You can flesh that out. But not all testing is applied equally across all apps. But what was great about this, so essentially what we did is we opened up a port that wasn't supposed to be there. That could have happened, somebody did it from an unauthorized perspective, or they could have been misconfigured. But what's interesting about that is that we started doing this in our instances in AWS. And what happened is actually every other time we ran it, we actually didn't detect it. So when there's a misconfigured port, or you open up a new port that shouldn't be opened, there should be about 1,000 bells and whistles and lights, and that should never actually execute. But what we found out is in our AWS instances at United is that every other time our Palo Alto firewall did not detect it. Okay, that's interesting, right? Is that we paid a lot of money for that to actually detect it. But what was great is every time our cloud native configuration management tool caught it. We did not expect. We weren't expecting that something we really were not paying for would be the thing that detects it every time. It turned out that that was a major finding for us. Is that okay? Too fast. Okay. Thank you. One of the major findings was that when we introduced the misconfiguration, the port, okay, we expected the Palo Alto firewall to detect it, to block it, and to never be a thing. Okay. Furthermore, we also expected the firewall and the system to drive alerts and log events to a log tool or a SIM, security incident and event management tool. So those are other things we expected to happen. But we didn't know what was happening is our cloud native in AWS, our cloud native configuration management tool caught it every time. We didn't know that. Our plan was the firewall would detect those sorts of things. It actually was due to a configuration drift in environments. Furthermore, some of the other things we found were that So when the alerts got generated, when they went to the SOC, right? Because the alerts get generated, they correlate an event. The event goes to the Security Operations Center. Security Operations Center executes instant response. What we found out is that we knew the alert came from AWS, but we didn't know which AWS, okay? So United Health Group has a commercial software division, and we have a non-commercial sort of facilitates the business AWS series of instances. So we didn't know whether it came from the commercial software or the non-commercial sections. Now you can figure that out through the Elastic IPs, but it gets complicated when you talk about things like SNAT, and it could take anywhere from 30 minutes to 5 hours during a real incident. So we did this when there wasn't an incident. There wasn't an outage. There wasn't a problem, right? We did this proactively. But we would have, if there was a real incident, 5 hours is untenable to figure out what was going on. So the point is that this process of experimenting on our own systems by injecting failures that we're aware of, failures that we believed we had taken care of already. The problem is because our systems are changing, they're so large, they change so often, it's hard for us when we design something at the initial state to ensure it's always at that state, okay? And that's by sort of experimenting through the system, we're able to challenge the system in a way and learn new things about how it operated that we didn't expect. The way we could actually learn about the new things is because we weren't focused on getting it back up. We were focused on learning. And chaos engineering is about building a learning culture around failure. So essentially, yeah, here's sort of the story. Hey, unicorns and stuff. So essentially, we got a lot of value out of it. Chaos Slinger has 3 to 4 example experiments in the repo. My contact information. Oh, here's some other example experiments. You can do Kubernetes. I don't know why were the primary failures with Kubernetes is hard, right? So many pieces, right? But Kubernetes also generates a lot of failure and mistakes. And one of the primary security problems with Kubernetes is actually people keep exposing the Kubernetes API to the internet. Anyway, so there's a bunch of, actually there's a woman at Pinterest that is doing some really exciting work with security chaos engineering. What she's actually doing is she's experimenting with security chaos experiments on logging. So her security team believed if logging were to stop on one microservice, they would immediately detect it. They would be able to, within an hour, they'd be able to remediate it, and they have the backup logging again. Okay. Well, she actually did that. She started turning off logging on individual microservices. And what happened was they didn't detect it. I argue nobody in this room would detect it because everyone here looks at log volume. And it's hard to detect 10,000 events missing amongst 10 million. But that was great. They opened up their eyes to the problem. A lot of times if logging were to stop on a microservice, that's an indication of 2 things. You have a systemic failure on the rise or an attack is happening now. Because that's the visibility. So anyway, here's some examples. We can talk more afterwards. Yeah, here's Q&A. Thanks.
I have a few questions. We all also work for a company. I'm not going to name it. We're also concerned by security. And dealing with this kind of things makes the development process quite kind of painful sometimes.
What process?
Dealing with also security things, considering make it slow, rigid. What's your experience?
Yeah, so one of the things that you can really do with chaos engineering is I talked a little bit about advanced concepts here, but it all begins and ends with a game day. So a game day is a 4-hour exercise typically where you have a security person in the room, product person. It's typically a product team that runs it, but you have somebody that actually does the chaos engineering, the monitoring team. But what's great about it is because security people, product people, business folks all have the same like failure, like that thing goes down, security people think it's a breach, IT people think it's an outage, product team thinks it's a bug, and the customer service people are like, I don't care, it's an outage for the customer, we're losing brand. But what's great about it is during a game day exercise, you actually create common enemy around failure, right? And everybody's minds get blown when they see it didn't work how they thought it did. But that's a great way to bring a security person to the table, because believe it or not, the majority of people, like I said, are still careful, even security people. What they've been told is right can often be changed, right? And what's great is to give a security person context around, hey, it didn't work the way you thought it did either. But you start building empathy. Empathy is a two-way road. It's got to be built. So.
Thank you. Any questions? No? Yes. Dan.
Oh, no, mine's a really easy one. I think, so you mentioned Palo Alto Firewall a number of times, and you just kind of tossed it in there.
Yeah.
And I've heard of this thing. What's a Palo Alto Firewall? Why should I care?
A Palo Alto, it's just a major brand. Palo Alto's a major network company. They create web application firewalls or firewalls. What firewalls essentially do is they control sort of traffic on the network, sort of to make either open or close ports, that the right ports are open at the right time, the right layers of OSI are coming through or not, and that it's not somebody actually trying to hack their way into your network. It's sort of one way to help prevent that type of activity. But the problem with that classification tool, I think I know why you asked me this question, is that they're typically, it's part of that more expert knowledge, that domain specific knowledge you need in order to run that. And they're very heavy sorts of types of controls. But I don't know if that answers your question. But that's right. Okay, yeah.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, I have a question.
Oh no, okay, all right.
We won't go home now. So sure. You were talking about fault or error injection. How do you do it? Because is it done supported by tool-aided thing, or you just set up a strategy, experiment with the system? Because my concern is how to prepare for the unpredictable.
Mm-hmm. Oh, no, that's a great question. So if Casey were here, Casey Rosenthal was one of the creators of Chaos Engineering at Netflix. He would say that Chaos Engineering was initially a tools discipline, for a series of tools, capabilities for SREs, site reliability engineers, to understand how their system worked, because there were Netflix, when he was there, was roughly about 30-some% of North American internet, which was still a lot. They had problems determining what the heck was causing these issues. So that's why they created Chaos Monkey, CHAP, the Big Circle tool, the interactive tool, that Visceral. Visceral is just another way. It's part of the domain of tools called observability tools. But it's a way for, maybe you couldn't understand all the thousands of lines of log entries, but you could understand visually how that translates into a picture. And that's what it's about. It's about driving context and understanding about how our systems behave. And if you don't understand fundamentally how your system behaves, how can you expect your security to be any different? So.
What do you think? Can we really understand these systems? Because real complex systems consist like 10 million, 100 million lines of code. So we are talking about really complex systems. Do we have a chance? Or what do you think? To cope with this kind of challenges, because I can assume we could do it for a desktop app. It's an easy thing. But when we are talking about distributed systems, what do you think?
Well, so students of resilience engineering would say that complex problems are in need of complex answers, so thousands of, is that, it all begins with the things you do now, your test-driven development, right, your pipelines, being good at that. the problem is, so you don't stop doing any of that. By the way, don't be confused. None of that stuff lost any value in this picture. You do all of that. Problem is because the scale, speed, and disparate nature of what we're building now has created kind of a new era of issues and problems. This because as humans, we can't, they're so big, we just can't mentally simplify that without causing further problems. So,
okay, thank you. Any questions? Because I'm just the one who keeps on talking. Good. Anyway, I have a few more questions. Probably I'm going to ask it later. No. You compared testing with experimenting.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm in this business for over 20 years. And I think true and valuable testing is experimenting. So I just couldn't get the point. So I can imagine that few guys in the east somewhere, they just tick in boxes, and then we can compare experimenting with kind of ticking boxes and following a script. What did you mean by?
I'll start with the security world predominantly, but I can sort of expand in general. But the premise is that you kind of already know what you're looking for before you go looking for it. Is you're looking for validation of some sort or verification that something acted. You try to prove something that you already know to be true or false. Okay, where experimentation, you're trying to your focus is not necessarily to you do get a form of testing out of experimentation is that you do verify that something worked the way you thought it did, but the point is actually to derive the new information, to observe events that you didn't know were occurring before.
Yeah, but I think, in my view, decent seasoned tester is supposed to do that, to uncover the unknown unknowns, right? So I think, from my perspective, ticking boxes and following a script and just validating that your your assumptions are right, give no or just little value, right?
Oh yeah, so
my view, a seasoned, decent tester is supposed to do what you said and what you meant by experimenting.
I would say so, and I would say that I'd hope that we all are taking sort of that approach to testing. It's really focusing more on a sort of different evolution of the system than it is more like the pipeline series of testing. But like, at least in security predominantly, we focus mostly on, trying to find, sort of validate CVEs or attack patterns or signatures. We test for those known things because those have happened before. But what we're looking for actually is the special thing. You can figure out some of this through your testing. I see where you're coming from. It just depends on the maturity of a shop. But like the problem still happens when you talk about these large-scale distributed systems. Is I guess you can still test and verify things, but the premise and nature of why you're doing it is different.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for this amazing presentation. We have some small gifts for you.
Oh, thank you.
Actually, it's a Rubik Cube, probably the most famous Hungarian thing, and a good glass of wine.
Oh, great.
I'll put it here.
Thank you.